Welcome to my channel. Table of contents. There is a book inside Crimson Desert that most players never open. It sits behind a quest reward. It looks like a background texture. Optional, supplementary, the kind of thing you collect and forget. 107 pages. And Pearl Abyss never tells you to read it. My name is Solus. And what Alustin's journal actually says changes the entire story. Not just Crimson Desert story, but Black Desert Online story. Both of them all at once. Because the journal doesn't just explain where Kliff came from, it explains why Black Desert Online exists the way it does. The chaos, the contradictions, the fragmented timelines that players have been trying to rationalize for years. The journal has the answers. 107 pages for 107 attempts. That is not a coincidence. That is the spine of everything. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what I mean. What this book actually is. The game never fully explains what Alustin's journal is. You meet Alustin, you receive his guidance, you feel the weight of his authority behind every mission the main quest implies, but never fully articulates. And then at some point, if you are the kind of player who reads, you find the journal. And you realize the game never told you what you were holding. Alustin is the keeper of the Library of Providence, a structure inside the abyss, above the entire continent. Above, in fact, all worlds inside the abyss, plural worlds. That word matters, so hold it. The journal is his, and it does not start with Kliff. Kliff is not even the first entry. He is not the beginning of this record. He is somewhere in the middle of a document that stretches across generations. Entry after entry of Alustin watching someone else fail, selecting candidates, granting power, engineering relationships, and placing allies. Not only that, removing obstacles and then writing it all down. In Black Desert Online, Alustin is mysterious, ageless, an authority whose depth you can feel but never fully access. In the journal, the version of Alustin nobody talks about, he is tired, methodical, occasionally wrong in ways that cost other people everything. Kliff is not the hero of this story. Kliff is the last one left. The journal is not linear. Pages 1 through 10 are not the beginning. They overlap. They reference events from pages 50, 70, and even 90. Alustin writes the way someone writes when they've been doing something long enough to know which moments mattered in retrospect. That structure is intentional, and it changes how every reveal hits. This is not a history book. This is a case file. The difference is important. Most players see Umbra as a boss, an in-game threat, a darkness to be defeated eventually. The journal reframes that entirely. Page 1. The first entry Alustin commits to this record. This time leap allowed us to escape Umbra, yet it changed nothing. Umbra will surely arrive in this era once more. What this tells us is someone before Kliff, before the events of this game, tried to escape Umbra by moving through time, and it did not work. Umbra followed across time into the present era. That is not a boss. That is inevitability. And here goes page 2. Umbra managed to devour a fragment of White Crow. Her uncorrupted half is alive and still aids us, but the fractured essence of her disappeared into the land below. White Crow is Kliff's power source, the guardian of the abyss, tethered to Kliff by Alustin's design, and Umbra devoured part of her. The corrupted fragment fell into Powell and became Hexy Marie. You know, Hexy Marie. The figure Kliff is sent to stop, the first true target of the main quest, is not an independent evil. She is a broken fragment of the same entity that gave Kliff his power, devoured and twisted by the thing they are all trying to stop. When Kliff kills Hexy Marie, he kills a piece of something that once protected him. That is not a story beat. That is a tragedy the game half explains. The journal finishes the sentence. This is where the journal stops feeling like lore. It feels like a file, a record of damage cataloged with the precision of someone who cannot afford to be surprised again. The clinical tone is the horror. Alustin does not grieve on the page. He documents. Because grief is a luxury, he exhausted somewhere around page 30. Page 4. Alustin's entry on Kliff. At last we have found the one we sought. An unwavering spirit with immense potential. Surely, he is the one to accomplish this task. He is not perfect, but that is of no concern. We shall guide him. That phrase, he is not perfect, but that is of no concern, appears across multiple entries, multiple people, multiple chosen ones. This is not a prophecy. This is a program. Identify the candidate, note the flaws, grant the power, position the allies, guide the process, trust that the pieces will hold together long enough to matter. Which leads us to page 5. I sought the Shy to borrow their power, so their bright energy might be passed on to him. Kliff's connection to the Shy, the feeling ancient and spiritually significant, the resonance that seemed like fate, was arranged. Before Kliff ever found that village, or any of it felt chosen, every moment that connection seemed like fate was chosen, just not by fate. In Black Desert Online, the Shy exists as a distinct race, bright energy, ancient spiritual resonance, a connection to something larger than the world around them. In Crimson Desert, that connection was engineered by one man, across generations, because the program required it. These aren't the same spiritual lineage. These are the same asset, deployed again and again across every attempt that came before. And now the number? The journal does not say how many candidates came before Kliff, but the lore does. 107. That is the exact number of times the timeline of this world has been reset. One entry for every attempt. One reset for every failure. Alustin's journal is not a record of Crimson Desert's story. It is a record of every world that tried to become it. If this is landing, this channel is where the rest of this lives. Subscribe before the next section, because what comes next is the part of the story nobody talks about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Page 45. After the loss of his comrades, he pressed forward alone, adopted the name Goyen. His existence is the fault of us all. His existence is the fault of us all. Alustin, the architect of the program, the keeper of the Library of Providence, the authority behind everything, is writing about a man whose suffering he engineered. Goyen was a candidate, selected, empowered, guided, and then the people Alustin placed around him died. And Goyen kept going, alone, twisted, disconnected from whatever purpose he started with. And Alustin's response is 5 words: clinical, exhausted, and past tense. His existence is the fault of us all. Kliff. The distance between Goyen and Kliff is not ability. It is not power. It is not the quality of the candidate. It is circumstances, timing, the specific arrangement of allies and obstacles that Alustin engineered differently this time, because he had learned from watching Goyen break. That is the program. That is what 107 pages actually document. Every failed candidate made the next one possible. Every broken attempt refined the mythology. Every Goyen taught Alustin something he built into Kliff. That is not a heroic journey. That's iteration. Return to page 2. Return to White Crow. A corrupted fragment fell into Powell and became Hexymarie. We established this, but the journal goes further. Hexymarie is not just a corrupted guardian. She is evidence, proof that Umber's reach extends into the tools Alustin built to stop it. The program's own infrastructure was compromised. The guardian designated to protect Kliff's power source was devoured. The fragment that fell became the first obstacle Kliff was sent to destroy. Alustin knew this. He sent Kliff anyway. There is a version of this story where that decision is monstrous, where Alustin is the villain, engineering a young man's entire life, positioning him to kill a fragment of his own protection. Moving pieces are on a board without ever asking the pieces how they feel about it. The journal does not call it monstrous, it calls it necessary. And that tension between Alustin's necessity and Kliff's ignorance is what the game's main quest never fully articulates. Kliff fights a corrupted fragment of his own protector. He wins. He moves forward. He does not know what he destroyed. The journal knows. Alustin knew before he ever handed Kliff his first mission. In Black Desert Online, Hexymarie appears again. Slightly different. Same presence, same weight, the same role. Something ancient and corrupted at the edges of the world that cannot fully contain it. That is not a design reused. This is not a coincidence of shared IP. If the theory holds, and the evidence says it does, Hexymarie and BDO is a version of the same corrupted fragment inside a timeline that never figured out how to contain her. A timeline where the candidate didn't make it, where White Crow's corrupted half kept existing, kept spreading, kept being what she became when Umber devoured her. That is the threat. That is what connects both games at the root. Black Desert Online's world has never been stable. The game makes this explicit if you read the lore instead of the quest markers. There is a reoccurring calamity. Everything goes dark, people lose their minds, and it is not treated as a one-time disaster. It happens again and again, as if the world cannot hold itself together long enough to settle. There is the Magnus, a place that ignores how time is supposed to work. Disconnected memories, events that don't flow from cause to effect the way they should. A record that skips. There are the lore inconsistencies, contradictory notes, kings' names that don't match across sources, time recording that conflict, multiple versions of the same events existing in the same world without explanation, and the witches, sages, who don't treat time as something fixed, because for them, it isn't. BDO's world is broken. The pieces barely match. Crimson Desert's hidden lore tells you why. The timeline has been reset 107 times, not clean resets. Every time something changes. Sometimes small things, sometimes enormous ones. Characters end up different. Events don't play out the same. Some things exist in one version and not in another. 107 attempts to produce a world that works. And what you see in BDO, the chaos, the anomalies, the lore that contradicts itself, is what the failed versions look like from the inside. BDO is not a broken game. It is a broken world, and it was always supposed to be. Consider Marnie. In Black Desert Online, young, frantic, a lunatic inventor making creations that barely function, wooden chimeras with simple logic, the first experiments of someone who never lived long enough to refine what he started. In Crimson Desert, older, more advanced, his mechanical gigant exists inside a hidden quest most players never find. A creation that requires mastery. The BDO version of him never reached. Same mind, same ambition, different timeline, different outcome. The BDO Marnie died too soon. The CD Marnie was allowed to finish that thought. Heroine in Crimson Desert, the Shy in Black Desert Online, nearly identical appearances, the same culture, the same clothing, a one-to-one correspondence Pearl Abyss left without explanation. It does not need one. They are the same people, born into different iterations of the same world. The Shy and BDO belong to a timeline that never stabilized. The Heroine in Crimson Desert belonged to one that finally did. In Black Desert Online, the Abyss leaks, shows up as black spirits, corruption, chaos. Nobody controls it. Nobody contains it. It exists at the edge of the world and pushes until something breaks. In Crimson Desert, the Abyss has structure, guardians, White Crow, Alustin, the witches, rules, core. Completing the Abyss puzzles doesn't seal it. The Guardian acknowledges you. They grant entrance, because the Abyss in Crimson Desert is not a threat to be sealed. It is something that needed fixing. And in this timeline, someone finally understood how. In Black Desert Online, the Black Spirit is a parasite. It gives power, but is always pushing, always influencing, always dangerous at the edge of every interaction. In Crimson Desert, the Axiom Bracelet channels the underlying power, but it is a cool tool. Controlled, contained, it lets Kliff access what Edna, the first person to ever control the Abyss power, could only partially harness. Because by the time Alustin designed the Axiom, He had watched 106 attempts fail. He knew every mistake. He built around every one of them. The Black Spirit in BDO is not a different entity than the Axiom in Crimson Desert. It is an earlier, unrefined version of the same solution, from a timeline where Alustin hadn't yet learned to make it safe. Black Desert is not a separate game set in the same universe with some shared lore. Black Desert is the archaeological record of every world that didn't make it. Every inconsistency players have tried to explain away. The contradictory kings' names, the fragmented timelines, the Magnus ignoring how time works. That is not bad writing. That is what a broken world looks like from the side. That is 106 failed attempts, leaving residue in the lore. Contradictions aren't errors. They are evidence of iterations that collided and left traces. Alustin's journey is the ledger of every one of them. 107 attempts. Every candidate selected by the same criteria. Every program run with the same methodology. Identify the flaw, work around it, position the pieces, trust the architecture. And yet the architecture kept failing. The journal does not explain why, not directly. Alustin is not the kind of writer who reflects. He records, catalogs, he moves to the next entry. But the journal's structure is its own answer. The non-linear pages, the way Alustin writes about Goyen, 5 words for a man whose entire life the program consumed and discarded. The way he writes about White Crow's corruption, clinical, passive, as if loss is a variable to be re-entered next iteration. The program optimizes for power, for position, for the right candidate with the right allies in the right place at the right time. It does not optimize for what holds people together when the program architecture fails them. It does not optimize for kindness. This is what 106 failed timelines have in common. This is what BDO's world is missing. Why it cannot stabilize. Why the calamity keeps returning. Why the Magnus cannot resolve its own contradictions. Power is there. The candidates existed. The pieces were positioned. But the world kept breaking because the program never accounted the thing that actually holds it together. There is a moment in Crimson Desert that the journal contextualizes completely differently once you have read it. A man helping someone carry something heavy, not as a quest, not a story beat, not a power activation or a combat sequence or even a chosen moment. Just that, then you remember what the program optimized for. What 106 attempts failed to produce on schedule. What Alustin, with all his precision, all his documentation, all his generational engineering, could not build into a candidate. Engineered unwavering spirit, engineered immense potential. He engineered the right allies, the right power, the right position. He could not engineer the decision to stop and carry something. 107 attempts, every version of this world, every candidate Alustin selected, positioned, watched fail. The answer was never the right program, or the right mythology, or the right arrangement of allies. It was that moment. An action small enough that the journal probably never recorded it. An action that Alustin's entire framework had no category for it. That is 107 words to produce on schedule. That is what makes the 107th attempt the last one Alustin ever had to make. Kliff, perfect, grieving, still lacking decisive resolve by Alustin's own assessment, is not the hero because he was the best candidate. He is the hero because he's the first one made that choice when it did not matter, when the program was not watching, when there was no strategic reason to stop. That is not an accident. That is the answer. Alustin's journal is not a supplementary. It is the spine of Crimson Desert's story. It is the architecture behind every choice Kliff makes before he knows he is making choices. It is the record of every go-in, every failed candidate, every broken iteration of a world that kept trying and kept coming apart. It is also the ledger of Black Desert Online. Every chaos anomaly, every corrupted spirit, every contradictory king's name in a mismatched timeline, that is what 106 failed attempts leave behind. BDO is not a prequel. It is not a sequel. It is the residue of every world that tried to become Crimson Desert couldn't. In Crimson Desert, this version, the one we are playing, is what happens when the 100th attempt finally produces something the player never knew. Not the right power, not the right candidate, right choice, at the right moment, made by someone who did not know it mattered. 107 pages, 107 words. One answer. My name is Solus. Subscribe. The lore goes deeper than you think.